Here's how to use a neutral density filter to capture epic long exposure photos. Now, what you're doing when you're putting a neutral density onto your camera, you're just reducing the amount of light coming into it. So often when you're shooting outdoors during the day, it's gonna be way too bright for you to shoot at longer shutter speeds, really anything under like 1/50th of a second, which is where you really need to be if you're trying to blur motion, and that's what a long exposure photo is. So you throw on your ND, and that way you're able to keep your same aperture, your same ISO, and you're just able to lower your shutter speed so you can start illustrating blur motion. Now, kind of a target for blurring water, which is very popular, is gonna be anywhere from like 2 to 10 seconds will give you a nice blur motion. As you can see in this photo here, we've got Matt Littlewood sent us this one. This one's a really sick comparison from Iceland. That this is probably about a 10 or 15 second exposure, and that's gonna allow the water to really be blurred. So you can see off the waterfalls there, just a beautiful blur motion, and even through the river too. It's nice and smooth as we go down and it flows into the bay. Without the filter, you can see that everything's very still. It's very high shutter speed. And another benefit too is without the filter, I mean, you can see the people up on the ridgeline. And not only is a long exposure image going to blur water or clouds, it's gonna blur anything that's moving. So if those people are walking on that ridgeline, it actually completely blurs them out in this example, which is an awesome benefit of the neutral density filter. So there's three main strengths of ND for long exposure images. And I would say that's the ND64, the ND1000, and the ND100,000. And that's gonna be a 6, a 10, and a 15 stop filter. Now you're gonna be using that ND64 for kind of your golden hour shoots. That's usually gonna be enough to get your shutter speed in that like 2 to 10 second, maybe 15 second range, which is gonna blur water very, very nicely. Now, if you move to midday shooting, you've got a lot more light coming into the camera, so that's when that 10 stop ND1000 is gonna really make the difference, and that's gonna pull you into that same kind of like 2 to 10 second range, perfect for water. Now the 15 stop, pretty much just gonna be used for shooting midday when you need to get your shutter speed at like 2 to 5 minutes to capture the blur motion of clouds. And that's also gonna be dependent on how fast the clouds are moving. If they're moving really fast, you probably only need like a 2-minute shutter speed. Now, if they're moving very slow, you might need like a 5 or a 10-minute shutter speed in order to capture that motion blur of a cloud. Let's take a look at this next example from Matt. He's got the ND1000 PL filter on there, so 10 stops of light reduction. Kind of the middle of the day. It looks like a decent amount of cloud cover though, but this is getting him to that 30-second shutter speed, really blurring the water on that waterfall, creating that mystic smooth look as it flows out of the river there. And you can actually start to see, if you go back and forth between the filter and no filter, the clouds are very, very defined on this one. Whereas the filter, it's actually starting to blur those clouds a little bit, not quite to the dramatic effect I was talking about before that a 2-minute exposure would yield, but you're starting to see a little bit of motion in those clouds. Now, if you threw a 15 stop filter on here, you would definitely see those clouds streaking in whichever way that the wind was blowing them. Let's take a look at another long exposure photo. So without the filter here, you can see that there are cars on the freeway there in this cityscape shot. Now, if I throw a 10 stop filter on here, it's basically blurring out everything that is moving in and out of frame as long as my shutter is open. So at 30 seconds, those cars are long gone and long out of frame, which is why they completely disappear out of this picture. So it's perfect for blurring cars completely out of a scene, or people if there's a lot of people moving in and out of your landscape shot. Just another cool way to use long exposure times in your photography. So that's how you can use ND or even VND filters. They're the same exact thing, they just reduce the amount of light coming into the camera to capture long exposure images. Now remember, the longer your exposure time, the more motion is going to be blurred in your frames. In landscape photography, pretty much the most popular ones are blurred water, blurred clouds, or blurring out subjects moving in and out of your frame. If you have any questions, shoot us an email. I'm Jeff. See you on the next one.